the case of Ukraine, they're talking in the United States, they're talking about Tomahawk missiles with a range of 1,000 miles, which would be 1,600 kilometers. And it seems that the administration, it somehow, the Trump administration is merging into the Biden administration, that we saw the same sort of policies. Here is what Keith Kellogg said about the decision on their part.
Clarify, are you saying, though, that it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president?
I think reading what he has said and reading what Vice President Vance has said, as well as Secretary Rubio, the answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuaries. That's one of the reasons I believe that this last week, and it has been confirmed, that President Zelensky asked President Trump to get Tomahawk missiles, which give you a depth. They're really good systems. America makes the best systems in the world.
Are we giving him the Tomahawks?
Well, that decision has not been made, but he's asked. I know that President Zelensky did, in fact, ask for them, which was confirmed by a social media post by Vice President Vance. That's going to be up to the president to do it.
Yeah, and we've heard from Lavrov at the UN. He said any aggression against Russia will receive a decisive response. NATO and the EU should have no doubts about this. What's your evaluation? What's your assessment of the latest events, considering the case of Ukraine?
Well, I think we have to be careful here with what we're talking about. First of all, obviously, there are conflicting interpretations of what Keith Kellogg just said about the Tomahawk, for instance. Certainly, Zelensky asked to have Tomahawk missiles. But I'm not sure that the US leadership, as it was with Joe Biden, by the way, is ready to provide such kind of weapon to the Ukraine. And the problem is less military than political, because giving such kind of weapon to the Ukrainians is, technically and militarily, probably it's not a big issue. I mean, it's certainly an issue for the Russians, but they probably have defense and systems to counter that. So, yes, it's certainly an additional problem for the Russians, but I'm convinced that the Russians are in a position to find solutions to that. So, militarily, it wouldn't change much the situation, but politically it changed radically, because that means that since the beginning of the war, U.S. has consistently refused and rejected the idea of allowing or providing weapons to Ukraine that would make Ukraine able to strike in the depth of the Russian territory. Even the attacks that were delivered to Ukraine were in fact modified to avoid them to reach their maximal range. As a result, the Ukrainians have never been able to strike with attacks in the, let's say, strategic depth of Russia. They have been able to strike in the tactical depth, and that had been allowed by the Americans that was, I think, in May 2024, as the Russians made this advance in the area of Kharkov. And then the Ukrainians asked to have the ability to strike in the rear of those attacking forces. So it was, and I think it was called like a tactical box that was allowed, that had a depth of about 50 kilometers or so. And then later in 2024, the Ukrainians tried to force their way into the idea of striking in the depth of Ukraine by striking Bryansk. at a distance that was something like 120 kilometers from the border. So that means they had to bring the attackers very close to the border. They just fired one missile and then withdrew very quickly. Normally, when you use this kind of missile in the practice, the Russian practice and Ukraine practice, is that you strike in to be safe against counter battery fire. You strike at a distance of 2/3 of the maximal range of the missile. As a result, those launchers don't go too close to the border. But in order to reach Bryansk, they had to go very close, and then they withdrew, so the Russians were not able to catch the launcher. In any case, this idea of reaching in the depth was then, because you had this debate at the time in the Biden administration to allow or not this kind of strikes against the Russians. My personal view, I mean, not my personal view, my assessment of the situation is that the Biden administration never allowed the Ukrainians to strike in the depth of the Russian territory, at least not in the operational or strategic depth of the Russians. And that was the time last year when this happened, when these strikes against Bryansk happened. There was also some talks by the Ukrainians to have nuclear weapons, and apparently the approach at that time, Donald Trump, who was then in the presidential campaign, and that's what Trump said. We have to be careful about what Donald Trump said, but apparently he was approached by the Ukrainians and they asked him to have nuclear weapons when he would be president. And at the same time, that was August 2024, the Ukrainians they publicized their new missile, which was designed the Hrim 2 or Grom 2, if you take the Russian interpretation, which has been presented later as the Sapsan missile. It's the same one. This missile was designed in Ukraine. A prototype was presented officially, and it was designed to be produced in Dnipropetrovsk, in the Yuzhmash company. And all that happened in between August and September last year. When early November, the Ukrainians took Bryansk, the Russians then answered very brutally with the Oreshnik missile against precisely Dnipropetrovsk and the Yuzhmash production plant in Dnipropetrovsk. So I think the issue there was, because there was all this discussion about the long range and the depth of Russian territory, the Russians understood that the Ukrainians were trying to force their way into this idea, and therefore they use the Oreshnik missile to achieve two objectives. First of all, to destroy the production plant for the Hrim 2 or Sapsan missile in Dnipropetrovsk, and second, to ask that if any attempt would be made to reach the operational or strategic depth of Russia, they would then use new weapons that are devastating and that basically no air defense system in the West can stop. That was, I think, the message, because the Oreshnik missile at that time was not yet in production. It started to be in production early this year or late last year. And so the Russians just wanted to send a message. And I think this was an attempt to prevent a decision against the of long use of long range missile in the depth of Russian territory. Now, with the Trump administration, we are in a constant uncertainty because they say everything and its opposite the next day. My feeling is that when the Americans today, or Trump, talks about the depth of Russian territory, he has in mind the tactical depth of the territory, but he has not the strategic depth. I mean, again, I don't know, and I'm not sure anybody knows what exactly is in the mind of Donald Trump. My personal view is that he doesn't want to have an escalation in this conflict. He doesn't want to have suddenly a strike against Moscow that would trigger an exchange of missile and things like this. I'm not sure he wants that. But on the other hand, and that's probably also the position of some people in the Pentagon that say, well, it's legitimate if you are at war that you can be able to strike the rear area of your enemy. And the rear enemy area of your enemy, well, when it's in the, let's say in Pokrovsk or something like that, the rear can be still on the Ukrainian territory if you want. But if you are in Sumy, then the rear can be in Russia itself, meaning that I understand, and again, we are at war, meaning that the idea that you can strike the rear area of your enemy sounds to me logical. It makes sense, militarily speaking. But since you are the one who provides, since the Americans are the ones who provide the weapons, they also take a responsibility in the capability of the Ukrainians. And they know that the Ukrainians are not, let's say, very shy in attacking the civilian population. Meaning that basically the West is participating to the conflict. Let's be clear. When you provide weapons to a fighting party, you are part of the conflict. Let's be absolutely clear about this. The French, the Germans, the British are a party of the conflict. They take part to the military operations, both with advising at staff level, with officers there, also with special forces, but also by providing weapons to a fighting, and then also the whole logistical, the supply lines is includes those countries. You know, when you provide a tank, a Challenger tank, or AMX 10 RC tank, or Caesar howitzer or something like that, and you provide also the logistical support for this, repair, maintenance, and all that, and ammunition, of course, then you are part of the logistical line of this of the Ukraine. So, and when you are part of the logistical line, that means that you are involved militarily, operationally. So there is absolute for me.
They're giving them everything, intelligence, the targets,
Yes,
everything.
yes. I know that comes into addition. But I mean, when there is a difference, because the French have argued that providing weapon to a party is not may not be considered as being a party of the conflict. And that's true. I mean, if you provide, let's say, if the US provide weapons to Italy, let's say, and in 10 years from now, Italy gets involved in a conflict, you cannot say that the Americans were part of the conflict. I mean, they provided the weapon 10 years before, and that's logic. That makes sense. But when you are in the conflict and you jump in the conflict to provide weapons, and you provide the logistical supply, and you provide everything that allow your ally, in essence, to fight, you are part of the conflict. There's absolutely no question about this. I mean, I think the Russians are extremely patient because they could strike any objective in France. I mean, military objective in France. I mean, in my view, regarding international law, would be absolutely no problem. Let's be clear about that. And the same applies to the US. When you provide weapon to a fighting enemy, you are part of the conflict. That's it. That's the background, if you want. But now, when we listen to this depth, I think most of the people today understand that you can strike the Russians in their tactical depth. That means something like between 30, 60 kilometers inside behind the front line. Let's put it that way, behind the front line. And that's probably something that would be accepted. The problem is that Ukrainians, as I said before, tend to strike objectives that are not military objectives. You know, the Russians have made an effort to have their the whole rear area, if you want, the operational rear area. I mean, the logistics and the supplies to their fighting troops. All that is on Ukrainian territory. I mean, the former Ukrainian territory. There is very little that, I mean, obviously you have the production plant and all that in Russia, but the essence of the operational part of the logistics is on Ukrainian territory, meaning that, I mean, the former Ukrainian territory.